class. I hope you've had a fantastic long weekend and are ready for a full week of learning. We should finish the class novel today. No, not today, sorry. We should finish the class novel this week because after this one there is only one more chapter to come. I know I said that last week, but it was a bit too many loose ends to tie up into one chapter. So there's one more chapter to come after this one. That makes 19 chapters altogether. My goodness me. Right, so if you remember, they were at Eric's and things weren't going too well. So the main character decided to take matters into their own hands and allow Darwin to bark. Now, if you remember, if Darwin barks 3 times and if anybody doesn't find shelter or safety by the 3rd bark, they die of terror. So that is the legend of the Coochie. It's a real Highland legend, that one. Okie dokie, so chapter 18. Let's see what happens. Darwin's first bark resonated around the whole group. All the humans stood still, as though they had been frozen in place, while the animals looked back at us. In my head, I could hear Mum explaining the Coochie's power, why people had been so frightened of Darwin's species. On the 3rd bark, you had to get to safety, or what were her exact words? You would die of terror. I wondered if I had made the right decision as Darwin opened his mouth to bark again. Had I acted too quickly without really considering the consequences? The first person to snap out of the stupor of fear and shock was, of course, Eric. That man seemed to be superhuman in his ability to ignore any dangerous situation. He saw the need for quick action and pulled his gun out of his coat. Not a tranquilizer this time. A real gun, I was sure of it. My brash, unthinking mind acted again, and I opened the door to the Lavellans' cage. If I had tried to stop Eric, he would see me and shoot me, but the Lavellan was smaller, much smaller than I was. Perhaps he could slip over to him unseen while the cruel man was intent on watching Darwin, making sure his aim was going to be right. The Lavellan did not even look at me. It shot out of its cage and bounded over to Eric, looking remarkably like a sausage-shaped weasel. Reaching the armed man, the Lavellan scampered up to the top of his boot and sank its teeth into Eric's leg. The teeth were only small, but sharp enough to distract Eric from his intention. I heard the shot and looked at Darwin, anxiously scanning him for any injuries. There were none. When the Lavellan had bitten him, Eric must have lost his aim before he pulled the trigger. I let out a sigh of relief, but a split second after, I heard Darwin's 2nd bark. At this sound, the 2 henchmen gave up their task to defeat the 4 other mythical creatures. They turned and ran. They could not have run any faster if a pack of lions had been after them. The mythical animals watched them go before they leapt over to where Chris, Carol and George and Mum were sitting. Don't know why I put that. I meant to put where Mum, Chris and George were sitting because of course where Mum, Carol and George were sitting because of course Chris has disappeared. The water horse lay down in front of them, twisting its body, which was like sea waves, and made a wall of water blocking the 3 cryptozoologists from Darwin. I could hear Mum shouting my name over and over again, but her voice was distorted and muffled through the water horse. They were safe, I was sure, from Darwin's barks. Now, it was only Eric who was in danger. Well, Eric and me. I looked around. There were places I could hide, but I wasn't sure if any of them would be safe enough. I would certainly be able to hear the bark, and besides, Eric was distracted by the Lavellan's teeth right now, but he may try and shoot again, and I had to make sure that Darwin was safe. Desperate, I did the only thing I could think of as I saw Darwin tense his body again for his third bark. I crouched down and clung on to Darwin, wrapping my arms around him and burying my face on his voluminous fur. And I heard Darwin's third bark. For a moment, I wondered if my heart had stopped and I had actually died. The bark had sounded muffled to me, but I had still heard it. Therefore, I was still in danger. But I didn't feel scared. The only thing that frightened me was the idea of dying, but the bark had not terrified me. It had just sounded like the other two barks. I mean, it was very quiet, as though someone was covering up my ears, so maybe I was dead. I couldn't even hear Darwin's heartbeat as I continued to cling on to him. Then I felt something. Something scampered up my back and perched on my shoulder. I could feel something snuffling my ear and hair. I opened my eyes, realizing only now that I had screwed them shut. The first thing I saw was a thick fur of Darwin's, but I dared to turn my head, finding myself face to face with the Lavellan. It had been the Lavellan who had scampered up me and brought me back to reality. I grinned across at it, but turned to face Darwin when he licked my face. My legs didn't feel like they were going to support me as I got to my feet. "Thank you," I said to Darwin as he let me lean against his shoulder for strength. I realised as I spoke that my hearing had gone strange. It still felt as though my ears were covered, and although I could hear myself talking, it was only like it was ringing through my head, as though I could only hear it on the inside of my brain. Feeling a stab of panic come over me, I forced myself to turn around and look at what had happened. The water horse was still swirling around the three adults, and I had no way of knowing if they were all right. I walked over to it, but I couldn't see past the barrier that separated me from them. The next thing I looked at was Eric. I don't know what I was expecting. Him to have been turned to stone, for him to have run away and disappeared. In reality, he was lying very still on the ground. Taking a big gulp as though it was going to make me braver, I stepped over to him. I wondered if he was playing dead, but realised when I saw his face that no one could fake an expression like that. I had never seen anything like it, and I hope I never do again. I had belittled, almost laughed at, the myth that the Kushi could kill people through their own terror. Now I realised just how true it had been. Even after everything Eric had done, and although I knew that it had been either Eric or everyone else who was there, a stab of guilt still bit into me when I considered what I had allowed to happen. The Lavellan was still on my shoulder, and I stroked its short fur, feeling my strength returning gradually. Darwin plodded over, tired, to lean against me, and the water barrier between me and my mum slowly disintegrated into the water horse. I let out a silent cry when I saw Mum alive and well, if a little bit wet. Beside her were kneeling Carol, George and Chris, with three of the mythical creatures. I spared only the briefest of thoughts about how Chris was suddenly there, but my attention was really on my mum. She clambered to her feet and rushed over to me, holding me so tight I could feel the water from her drenched clothes seep into mine. It was the safest I had felt since I had gone to stay with Mum. And that is the end of the chapter. So there is one more chapter to come that hopefully wraps up all the little loose ends and answers any questions that you might have about what was going on and how it happened and stuff. So comprehension time. Let's have an inference Iggy question first of all. Now, What happened to Eric? By the end of the chapter, what had happened to Eric? Okay. Now let's see if I can find a tricky word that we can use for a vocabulary Victor question. Here we go. So I'll read a sentence and then I'm going to pick out a word and I'd like you to write down what you think it means. I crouched down and clung on to Darwin, wrapping my arms around him and burying my face in his voluminous fur. Okay, so the word you probably guessed is voluminous. I hope I'm saying it right. What do you think it means? Please write it down in your jotter or type it into Google and let me know your answer. And the last question is, I've given you two quite tricky ones, so let's have a Rex Retriever question. And we'll make it quite easy, and I hope you all get this right. How many times did Darwin bark? So how many times did Darwin bark in that chapter? Okie dokie, so we are going to leave it there. Now this week I should be seeing all of you at some point on Google Meet, so I'm really looking forward to seeing you then. It's been quite a while since I saw your faces and I'm really missing you. So please make sure that you do go on to Google Meet at your time, at your slot. So bye for now, and I will see you tomorrow.